Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MyFootballWriter podcast. It's episode 20. Apologise that we missed last week, but the podcasts are back, and really, so is Norwich City's annual mid-season injury crisis. But for this week, as you can probably already see if you're watching on YouTube, but you wouldn't have seen it if you're listening on Spotify, we've got a guest with us. We're joined by one of MFW's very own, and now one of the regulars for the Pink, and he does all the match reports. He does the Have Your Say on Twitter Spaces. It's Samuel Seaman. So, Sam, a very big pleasure to have you with us tonight. And first things first, before we dive into the Norwich mardle as we usually do, how have you been yourself? And of course, Henry and Will as well. How have you all been over the last, 14 days, really? Because that's how long it's been since we all sat down and got together.
Yeah, I've been good. I've been I feel like quite busy with everything that's been happening with Norwich City, but really pleased to be on the podcast for the first time since you guys have sort of revamped it, and I've been watching on from afar, and it's been good to see. So nice to be back around the MFW sphere myself, and although probably the feeling isn't overwhelmingly positive coming out of that game yesterday, it does feel like things are heading in the right direction. So although it's been quite busy for me and for everyone connected to Norwich City recently, not been too bad at all. Yeah.
There you go. Anyone else want to follow? Oh, there we go. Sorry, Henry. There we go. So obviously we're all a bit frosty on the Wi-Fi front.
We are, yeah. I've been good, thank you. Sort of similar with all the games that are happening. I've been working quite a few, so but no, I think from a Norwich perspective, on the whole, I think it's going quite well. I know we had 3 draws on the trot, and obviously the Cardiff result really disappointing in the end. But I think the feeling that I'm getting from this Johannes Hoff-Torp side this season so far has been an overwhelmingly positive one, and I'm still really enjoying his football. Got to go to the Middlesbrough game, which was the first game I've been to this season, and what a game that was as well. So me and Will actually did a video on that. We did a Norwich spotlight and pretty much digested everything, and a really good game, and hopefully now we can bounce back with our 2 games this week and finally get those victories to push us up the table a bit more.
Yeah, I'm much better than I was 24 hours ago. I was a bit hot-headed, I think, as you guys saw in our group chat. But overall, mate, I'm good, and it's good to welcome Sam onto the podcast as well. So all is good, mate. Let's hope for a good week for Norwich coming up.
No, let's certainly hope so. They head to Sheffield Wednesday on a Tuesday, which I always feel is a bit wrong. You can't play Sheffield Wednesday on a Tuesday. That just doesn't seem right. But hey ho, we move on, and then it's Bristol City on the Saturday, which again there'll be 2 somewhat tough tests, albeit Sheffield Wednesday under Danny Roll. They've sort of become a bit of a reinvented side since he arrived last season at the latter stages. Bristol City under Liam Manning, of course, joined from Oxford United, another promising young manager. So that will be an interesting sort of clash between 2 young managers who actually, they look very similar. Manning and Johannes Hoff-Torp, they must be long-lost brothers or something like that. There must have been a Scandinavian trip over to wherever Liam Manning's from. I want to say he's from Norwich, actually. I feel like there you go. Sam's nodding away. So there we go. There was obviously a bit of a Scandinavian invasion in Norwich maybe about 30 to 40 years ago. But that'll be an interesting one, both games. But we'll turn back to what happened in Wales yesterday, where found out from Chris Gorham himself, Norwich have lost more championship games this year in Wales than they have in England, which is, for the fans that travelled there, that's horrible. You go all that way. Sam himself went all that way. He made the long old trek to Wales yesterday in Cardiff, and Norwich, where they just went 1-0 up, another absolute scorcher from Borja Sainz, and then just in the final 5 minutes, or 10 minutes rather, just completely seemed to fall apart and conceded 2 late goals in the 88th and then the 94th minute. Of course, a real heartbreak for any Norwich fan who went, and the players as well. It's a real sickener to lose like that, and in that manner, having been a goal up for over half an hour in the game. But really, for all of you, where do you think that it went wrong? Was it maybe tired legs or the poor choice of substitutions? Of course, Norwich have a long injury list at the moment that was only added to before the game, and they're missing, of course, so many key players. But so maybe the squad's a bit thin in that sense in terms of who's actually available to bring on as a substitute. But where do you all think really that it went wrong at the Cardiff City Stadium, seeing as you all pretty much were able to watch it, except for me, really. I was up in Chesterfield for other reasons. So where do you all think that it went wrong from your individual standpoints?
So I think, first of all, it's probably a collation of what you've just said, Freddie. I think the squad, with Sargent and Slimani being injured, I think the squad does look paper thin at the minute. And I think that didn't help. And also, you have players who did come on, like Grant Hanley, who haven't really played that much in the last month or so and did look rusty. And we had a lot of people on Canary Call saying that JHT got his substitutions wrong. And I think I'd be inclined to agree. The fact that he changed them to go defensive and hold on to that lead, the way we were playing, we were the better side. We were playing good football, and it's a game where on the balance of play, we should have won. So why not?
Oh, I think he's gone. I think he's gone.
Awful. No.
Oh, there we go. He's back. He's back. He's back. Yeah. It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah, what I was going to say is Norwich have been historically awful at sitting on leads and defending leads. We are much better when we're at the opposition and playing that front foot aggressive football. It's such a cliche because the Norwich way has always been sign shit players and get relegated. But
apologies for language, Henry. You need to learn. You need to. You're a naughty boy.
But anyway, playing the Norwich way, sort of what the club wants in terms of that attacking football, is what has got us to championship titles and what has got us to the Premier League before. So I don't see why we sort of sat off really and sort of let Cardiff back into the game. I think us losing that game was purely down to our own doing, to be honest.
Yeah, the only thing I would say would be on those substitutions, probably I agree that the game did change after those and it did feel too negative. It felt like Norwich dropped back a little bit too much and it became attack versus defence to an extent that probably they can't quite deal with yet. And actually, as an attacking team, they're not really set up to deal with anyway. But I actually thought the first couple of substitutions worked okay. I thought when Jack Stacey and Ben Krasene came on, Norwich actually got a bit of impetus again after Cardiff had a decent spell after Sainz's goal. But it was when then Jakob Sorensen had to come off and they brought on Grant Hanley and Emmanuel Forsen that the problems seemed to come. But equally, I think that's sort of tied in with the injury situation because you have to look at it. Yes, bringing off Sorensen was probably the change that meant Norwich dropped a little bit too deep. They didn't have that presence in midfield and they had to defend maybe lower than they'd like to. But also they had a midfielder there who had played a handful of minutes between then and Oxford on the first day of the season. And for Torup, it's either you make a change that probably you wouldn't like to and you play Callum Doyle in midfield for the first time in his senior career, or you keep someone on the pitch who clearly didn't have the fitness to carry on for the full 90 and also will probably be needed on Tuesday against Sheffield Wednesday. So I thought he was sort of caught between a rock and a hard place there, to be honest. And although those substitutions probably did change the game in a negative way from a Norwich perspective, I'm not entirely convinced Torup had that much of a choice, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I shared Henry's narrative after the full-time whistle about the substitutions because it just felt like at the time, I think that was the most natural kind of blame to actually point out because the way the game kind of transpired into Cardiff's momentum, I think that's probably the most reasonable conclusion at the time. But I think thinking back about the game and just watching it overall and analysing it, I think one of our biggest issues was just like when we played a 5-3-2, just the composure to play out from the back just disappeared. There was no passing patterns. It just felt like whenever Norwich got the ball, especially in deep areas, that it was just going straight back up the field, and there was literally no one to try and get on the end of that. And it just felt that Norwich lost their rhythm, and they can never really seem to get together back that momentum. Maybe Cardiff did something tactically, which kind of helped themselves grab momentum of the game. But I just felt the way if you would have probably have compared Norwich's passing accuracies during the first about I'd say 70 minutes of the game, and then compare it to the last 15 minutes of the game, I think you see an absolutely massive difference in terms of accuracy levels and precision levels, because it was few and far between. And actually, I want to kind of touch on Gabe Forsyther as well, because actually I was actually very impressed with his performance, just like I was impressed with Marcondes and Sorensen as well. I'm sure we'll touch on that later, but I just think the way for Forsyther to come into the team and play against quite physical midfielders and likes of Siopsis and Turnbull, I think he managed to deal with that quite well. And I'm very happy that he's managed to really, really showcase himself at a good level in the Championship. It's still only one game, but I just felt like even when he came off, I just think the team just lacked control. And I just don't think Emanko Forsen is that kind of guy to relinquish control for you. And I think that's where Norwich kind of fell apart. But absolutely, I think those subs had an impact on the team. But then again, as you guys have pointed out, there was literally no options to kind of for it to go for if you wanted to keep that shape, because Samani was injured, McLean was injured as well. So I think he was kind of stuck in two ways, really. And I think it's so unlucky that you've got Nunes, Samani and McLean. All three of them can play holding midfield and play in that deeper role. Maybe McLean better than others, but all three can play that. And it just felt that Norwich just lost control of that game when none of those three were actually available. And I just don't think Norwich could find a replacement to play there, because I don't think Schwartau or any of those midfielders can play in that sixth role and just be very accurate on the ball, because I think they get a bit more overpowered, if you will. So yeah, very, very annoying, just lack of options. But I think performance-wise, I don't think we were outstanding. I think we were better than our opponent on the ball, but I don't think we were outstanding. But yeah, I just think those subs kind of killed it a little bit, but mainly it was just our composure to try and progress. There was literally Norwich went long, and it felt like I was watching Steve Bruce ball the last half an hour. So that was a shame. But up the Norwich, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's how it will always be. And regardless of how the team plays, you've got to back them through thick and thin. That's just ultimately what happens. And under a new manager and a new system, you still have to give it time and everything. And we know how good Norwich can be at full strength and when they're playing in full, free-flowing footballing ways. So we all know how good this team can be under Johannes Oftorp. It is just with those injuries, that is, of course, a big hit. There is, just to name a few, as you already have, Will, Kenny McLean is suspended due to a red card. Marcelino Nunez is injured. Anis Ben Slimane is injured. Josh Sargent is now injured, which that's the second season in a row now where Sargent, we don't know really in terms of maybe the extent so far. It's at most we know it's until the international break, and he may return after it. But it's, yeah, again, that is such a big loss already for a player who maybe he's not scored as many goals as expected of him so far, but he's provided a lot of goals for other players, which is just as important. And of course, Johannes Oftorp will want to get him more involved in a goal scoring sense. But from that already, a Sargent injury, could it maybe be season defining already? Although we're only about a quarter of the way through, but we know that when Norwich are without Sargent, of course, even though Borja Sainz has scored more goals than anyone else in England's top four divisions this season, it is still a major, major loss. Norwich they don't carry as much attacking threat without him. So is that a season defining injury? And then for yourself, Will, as well, do you think that, is there any academy lads who maybe could get the nod to get into the first team, or are we going to see Ant Sienats be the main man through the middle, and then we'll have just a couple of options off the bench if needs be to bring on?
I think if I was to reference the academy lads, I think Aaron Smith, obviously, he would be that kind of player who you would look at, maybe see if he can compete. But I think my observation recently with the academy and the first team is it feels like it's got to be two stages to kind of be a Norwich Academy player playing at first team level right now. It feels like you've got to showcase really, really good performances at 21's level, whilst also impressing in first team training. And I don't know if there's enough players that are doing both really, really consistently. Obviously, I think we saw Lucy Mahuvu actually step up to the fray, and I'm absolutely so happy for him actually, because I think he's been so good recently for the 21s. He's played left back in midfield as well, so I think he's probably your example of a player that's going to step up. But I think in terms of the forward line, I don't think so just yet. I still think they all need a bit more development, but. Go back to your Sargent point, mate. Yeah, it's a really, really big injury loss, depending on how long it's going to be, really. I like Ante Cernak, and I think he did showcase some flashes of quality and brilliance against Cardiff, but I just didn't have the overall feeling that he kind of gave us that overall threat which Norwich needed, really. And it feels like to me, especially, that I think it's going to have to be Borja Sainz is going to have to step up even more, really, because I just don't trust Ante Cernak to carry the burden of Sargent. I mean, I don't really expect him to either. I mean, he's just come from a new country at 20 years of age. So I think it's quite cruel to lay all the responsibility at his door. So then Norwich are in a bit of a conundrum, really. I think the way that Norwich are going to have to try and be a very, very good outlet now is just trying to exaggerate how they control games of football now. And I don't think you can kind of go... I think we've actually seen in glimpses through the season when Norwich have gone long through Callum Doyle to play long passes to Josh Sargent to kind of get them up the pitch. And I just don't think Ante Cernak has that physicality to do so. So I think it might lead to Norwich being a bit more braver in deep areas. So look, we'll see. But it's a massive, massive blow if that's the case, because Sargent gives you so much quality shooting, and even his passing qualities, I think, since Fopp has joined, has been absolutely brilliant with that Watford game, I think it was, and the whole game being very, very good examples of that as well. So it's a huge blow. Hopefully it isn't season defining, but I think we were there last year, weren't we, where it felt like if Sargent got injured, then Norwich were a much weaker side.
Yeah, sort of bouncing off Will's point there. I think in terms of what you said there, Freddie, about it being season defining, I disagree, but I think it's definitely season denting. Like, you look at last season, we obviously had Sargent out injured then, and that was when we went through our bad run. But ultimately, where David Wagner and his side wanted to be was in the top six, and when he returned from injury, that's exactly what happened. So hopefully this side under JHT can do exactly the same, and I'm sure we'll be there or thereabouts when we do have a fully fit squad. So it's definitely not season defining because there are so many games left to play, and I think Josh Sargent still has a part to play. But obviously it is a huge blow. There's no shying away from that. And what I will say about Sargent this season, yes, Borja Sainz has been the one taking all the headlines, but I think what Josh Sargent has done is probably gone under the radar a bit, because his goal output his goal output probably hasn't been as good as what Norwich fans wanted. But in terms of his assists, his movement, his link-up play, he now looks like the complete championship striker for Norwich, and he's a far better player even compared to this time last year, I think. So yeah, without a doubt, it's a huge blow. But in terms of how the forward line looks, I said the same after the whole game when Kate Gordon got his goal. We still need to back Ante Cernak. You know, this is someone we spent big money on in the summer, and to just go, well, hold on, you've scored one goal, you're coming over from a different country, you've never been sort of acclimatized to the football and to the culture before, we're just going to hang you out to dry. I don't think is fair. And yes, I think he has been unlucky in front of goal so far, but I put it down to that. He you know, watching him, he does have something about him. So I'd put him as the main man. But you know, in terms of who can support him while Sargent's out, I think it's a huge blow, and I think we need to it's difficult, but we almost need to wrap Seaman now up in cotton wool because we really don't want to lose him with the threat that he can pose.
Yeah, I think it's also, if you're maybe looking for positives out of Josh Sargent's injury, a lot of what Henry said there about Seaman is going to apply not only when Sargent's injured, but also in future when, probably, if we're being honest, he goes and plays at a different level, or the club sell him, because we've seen from Jonathan Rowe going and Gabriel Sara that the club's model is to sell players and then replace them. And it feels like the sort of business that Ben Napper did this summer, it's not going to be as simple as Sara goes out, you sign someone who's ready to replace Sara, and he comes in and he plays like Gabriel Sara. It feels like players at younger ages are going to come in, learn their trade a little bit in the background, and then hopefully when somebody moves on, they're able to step into that role. And it feels a little bit like that's what's happening with Seaman, that he's going to play a little bit on the right wing. He's going to play up front maybe when Sargent isn't available. And then in future, hopefully he's good enough to be a regular starting number 9 for Norwich. And I think if you're looking for positives, not only with Sargent being out, but also some of the other injuries that Norwich have had, those players who in future will hopefully be ready to be regular starters are now going to be getting valuable game time in the positions that they're hoping to play in. So yeah, I think Henry's right to highlight Seaman, and I do think that although he definitely has a long way to go to be as good as Josh Sargent, there have been some fairly positive signs, even if he does look like a little bit of a different player at the moment.
Yeah,
there has been signs. Oh, sorry, Henry, go on.
Yeah, what I will say, sort of adding on to the point we've all made, is I think there's actually a lot of similarities between how Seaman has started and how Josh Sargent has started. I can remember that Premier League season where when Josh Sargent was playing, he looked so far off it. I didn't even think he'd do well in the Championship. I thought he was that poor for us that season. I thought he'd be almost a one season wonder and then just completely fade away, so to speak. But no, his rise and his development whilst being a Norwich player has helped him tenfold, and he'll be one of those players who, whether it's Brentford or another team in the Premier League, if he does go on to play Premier League football, it would have really benefited him staying in the Championship for the length of time he did. You're seeing it now with Dominic Solanke. I think he's the prime example. Would he have got that move to Tottenham if he didn't stay in the Championship with Bournemouth if they got relegated? I don't think so. I think for him, he looked off it in the Premier League, and he needed that development in the Championship in order to properly kick on. And you look at Seaman now, I actually think he probably looks better than what Sargent did initially when he first joined the club. But the similarities are there, even in terms of the positional play and being shoved out on the right wing when he's probably more of a number 9. So yeah, I think give him time and properly sort of embed him into this team, and he could do well for Norwich.
No, they're all extremely fair points to raise, especially the one about Seaman. It is pretty much identical to what occurred with Josh Sargent being shoehorned into a team because there is a number 9 who is the more favoured option by the manager. Of course, it was Timu Pukki at the time, and unless Josh Sargent had already scored double-digit goals, probably by about November when he finally did score his first goal for Norwich, there was no way Josh Sargent was going to be the first-choice striker in a Premier League side with a player who had scored about 60 goals already for Norwich by that time. So, no, it's of course a very fair point to raise, but just again, touching on those injuries just one last time, of course, these injuries for Slimane and Sargent more likely to have come out of maybe training sessions rather than actually playing in matches, as we know that Sargent and Slimane, they didn't go off really with for injury senses really against Middlesbrough. So could that maybe be down to quote a famous canary caller, could it be down to what's going on training, Neil, and see what's been going on there? There was similar sort of rumours when Norwich City had Daniel Farker in charge, in terms of maybe the intensity of sessions could maybe just be a bit too much and maybe a bit too physically demanding. So of course, none of us really have any clue what's going on the pitches at the Avant Training Centre. So do you think maybe that could be a factor potentially of maybe just it could be a bit too intense on some players, or are Norwich just really incredibly unlucky and they just seem to always have a bit of a crisis in a season down to several injuries at one time?
I think it's really hard to say for all of the reasons that you outlined there, but I think Torup post-match suggested that maybe there was a little bit of pain for Sargent after the Middlesbrough game that then sort of worsened over the days after that. So I don't know if that was necessarily as much of a training thing, but probably in their defence on that front with Sargent and Slimane, both of those you felt it's actually got to this point and you've thought they've been fairly fortunate with injuries given some of the problems that they've had. Sargent, I think even when he's sort of gone past his injuries and it feels like that's done with now, I think you could tell from the panic around his international break and the last time he was with the US that fans still don't quite trust his fitness levels, and it actually felt surprising that he had got to this stage of the season without suffering any problems, to be honest. Slimane, the same really. We've heard Torup all the way through saying about how he needs to improve his fitness and how he's not quite ready to start on a really regular basis yet. So on those two, it's probably more of a ticking time bomb type situation for me. And then on the others, I suppose you do have to wonder about intensity, because obviously Torup likes a lot of running. I think there's been a bit made about the statistics that the side were producing early on in the season, and they were doing pretty much more work than any other championship side in a lot of metrics. And of course, that's not only on match day. They also need to prepare for that with, you'd imagine, quite intense training sessions. But also, I think you saw with that Farker team, especially in that first season in the championship, the number of late goals they scored, the fact that they seem to be able to play their style of football all the way through games, that if you do lay that groundwork fairly early, then you can benefit with the sorts of performances that you can only gain really from high levels of fitness. So if it is intense training sessions, then I suppose at this stage of the Torup project, then I can sort of understand it anyway. As he said, it is quite hard to judge. And of course, there's various factors going into it. Luck is undoubtedly against them at the moment when it comes to injuries. But yeah, I'd say probably if it is intense training sessions, then you'd hope over the long term under Torup, then that Norwich actually see the benefits of that.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think you mentioned there, Sam, about it being similar to the Daniel Farker era and him making all of the Norwich players work doubly hard in training during his time, and again we reap the rewards for that. So I think that will inevitably happen under JHT if he does really push this squad. What I will say in terms of Josh Sargent, it could be a lingering thought in his head now, though, that like high intensity training that JHT's putting him through could maybe be a bit too much. So there's no shying away from it. Next season is Josh Sargent's biggest season of all time, with obviously a home World Cup for him, and that'll be something that he'll be chomping at the bit to make sure he's involved with. And obviously had a fairly lengthy spell on the sidelines last season, having probably maybe a bit of a lengthy spell on the sidelines this season. He can't afford to get injured from a personal viewpoint next season, but in case he does miss the World Cup. So yeah, maybe there is a conflict of interest there in terms of his training and sort of him needing to sort of manage his training a bit. But look, Josh Josh Sargent will obviously know that. What we've got with Josh Sargent is someone who does do all the hard work, the grafting. So I'm sure there's no doubts as to whether he'd want to do more intense and more vigorous training sessions. Of course he would, but it might get to that point where he has to think about the 2026 World Cup as well.
I just think as well, losing Slimani and McLean, sorry, in the same week as well as Nunes on the side, I think that is brutally unlucky as well, because that just removes all your number 6 options just immediately, and I think that's probably what cost us against Cardiff. But going back to the Sargent injury, I remember actually saying to you guys in pre-season that I don't trust Sargent to play 46 games at this level. I just thought it was going to be quite a big issue, and I actually remember at the time saying that was probably one of the reasons why I would have maybe looked to have sold him in the summer and kept maybe Gabby Sarah or Jonathan Rowe. Obviously, football doesn't work like that, but I did have my doubts about Sargent's fitness, and then I've kind of pondered on a thought today whether it was actually worth, if Norwich actually would have gone into the market and bought more of like an orthodox second choice striker. Looking at it's not a market in recent years which has been successful for Norwich, with the likes of Josef Dermich and Van Hooydonk, etc., and even Hugo to an extent. But it just feels like maybe could that have been an option as well? Like, what do you guys think about that, or do you trust in Serge that like he might come good in that role? Personally, for me, I'm not a huge fan of Serge in that striker role, because I feel like he's better suited, as like a inside forward on the right hand side, which he actually played really well against. I think it was Sheffield United at home, where he kind of picked up those nice pockets of space and turned away quite sharply. I think he's much better in that role than a striker role, really. So maybe could Norwich have got a second choice striker, maybe a more orthodox one? Like, what do you think about that? Is that a genuine thought, or Norwich just absolutely doomed in that market?
No, I wouldn't say we're doomed in the market. Of course, you can't just predetermine if a striker is going to be good or not. You can't just assume straight away when you sign a player, you're not going to be any good. Let's not bother with this. Why even make the signing? There's no point. You can never. That's what football is. It's a game of pure unpredictability. You never know if a player is going to just be the next Timu Pukki, or they'll be the next, as you already alluded to, the next Dermich, or the next Van Hooydonk, or the next Johan Elmander, if we're going to use examples from the past. You can never assume that and guess that straight away. But no, I think I would like to believe he will come good. As we've already alluded to, the fact that it is a new country for a young player who has come from a completely different league where the style of football is completely different. It's probably a lot less intense in the Polish league. Of course, we also signed Przemysław Płacheta from the Polish league, and that one didn't really work out all too good either. So maybe it's down to just the quality of the league is a lot different to what the championship is. Maybe that's a bit sort of biased toward, of course, we all four of us have watched a lot more championship games than we'll probably ever watch the Polish Premier Division. But no, I'd like to think he will come good. It's a case of really, I think the big argument is how much time do you give him? It's a lot of money, as already alluded to. It was pretty much all the money from the Adamida sale to Celtic was spent on Seaman. So that's, from that perspective, how long do you give a player of a quite relatively high price tag for someone who's pretty much untested at quite a high standard of football? You could argue that if you're harsh on him and you think that maybe he's not all what he's cut out to be, and the price tag, of course, will filter into some people's opinions. You know, I will say myself, I've not exactly been the kindest of individuals towards Seaman and my assessment and opinions on him. But it's just, if you can afford to be level-headed and be able to realise he is a young kid, he's coming to a brand new country, new league, new system, new manager, new everything for him. It's going to take time, and with the injury to Sargent, It's the perfect opportunity to grab the bull by the horns, and he's already got 1 goal this season, which maybe can boost his confidence a little bit, and a more run of games in a natural position. Who knows? Who knows what can happen? But that's my standpoint on it. Henry and Sam, is there anything else you'd like to add on that front?
I think
No.
Sorry, Henry. You go if you want.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Freddie. I think you're right. I think Sienach will have that confidence from that goal that he scored, and he needs to play all the games and just get that run of games behind him, and hopefully score more goals. Because in terms of his price tag being an issue, it shouldn't be something that he's scapegoated about, because you see it more and more, especially in the Championship nowadays, of players going for around the £8 to £10 million mark, which Sienach falls into. But yeah, I think you can't use that to scapegoat him. But what you can use that for is his development. Signing someone like that, we need to play him. We've shown financially that we're going to back him. We now need to show that on the pitch. And I think in terms of the calls for Sienats to maybe be rested, I think that's reactionary based on a game. Like if he hasn't scored or whatever, people are then saying, "Oh, well, we need another striker." And they're even saying it with Sargent. Like I was saying, Sargent's now got more to his game than just goals. But even when the goals have dried up a bit, people are saying, "Oh, we need a proper striker who can push Sargent." And I just think it's very reactionary, to be honest. I think in Sienats, what we've got there is clearly a good young player who we can develop and who'll work well, not only learning off Josh Sargent and what Sargent has taught him, but also we'll get to the stage where he can properly push Sargent as well.
I think it's just hard to find someone as well who is just going to come and sit on the bench. I think finding someone who can play that right wing role, and I think it was, it's another parallel between Sienats and Sargent, the fact that you've got someone who can play on the right, and maybe that wasn't especially successful in Sargent's case, but he's somebody who had interest from big clubs this summer who had done really, really well in the Polish league, albeit there are those concerns, obviously, between the difference in quality, as you highlighted, Freddie. But it's hard to get a really quality player in who's just going to come and sit on the bench. It's almost a less extreme example of the same problem Norwich have with a second goalkeeper and with George Long, who's obviously received quite a lot of criticism fairly recently, is that it is hard to find somebody who is ready to be in the starting 11, but is willing to just come and sit on the bench in the Championship. There aren't too many £7-8 million strikers who would come to the Championship and not expect to start week in, week out. There's also the development point. So I can understand why people are talking about the transfer market. And it is true that as soon as you lose Sargent, it does feel like a very threadbare sort of part of the squad. But equally, you've seen over time, plenty of clubs have struggled. And I don't think it's a coincidence necessarily that the likes of Dermich, of Van Hooijdonk have struggled at Norwich previously. There are other clubs where it's happened. You looked at basically Tottenham the whole time they had Harry Kane. They've got a big, long list of pretty poor strikers who they brought in to try and bring in competition, but ultimately weren't good enough, because if they were, they wouldn't have agreed to come and sit behind Harry Kane the whole time. And I think that's part of the problem that Norwich have as well. So as tempting as it is to say that they should go into the market and they should go and sign a top quality striker to compete with Sargent this January, who's ready to compete for a starting Championship berth, I'm not sure there's really the player out there who's willing to come and play that role, unless it's a Sienats who knows he's going to start on the right if he isn't up front.
Yeah, no, it is from that standpoint, yeah, it's difficult, as you've just highlighted there, Sam. There is barely anyone who in football is happy to sit on the bench. No footballer ever joins a football club because they're more than happy to sit on the bench, unless you're Scott Carson at Manchester City or you're Lee Grant or Tom Heaton when they were at Manchester United. So that's pretty much the only sort of position in terms of a third choice goalkeeper where anyone is happy just to sit on the bench and collect money for a living just by going around the country and maybe just acting more as a coach than a player on the training pitch. So no, it's completely that really in terms of in the striker department at Norwich City for the time being. But hopefully Sienats can crack on and, well, even over the next 2 games, can maybe get himself a goal or two. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see as to what happens against Sheffield Wednesday and Bristol City, both in those games. But going sort of more on to a statistical sort of point to talk about with Norwich. At the moment, they've got 13 points dropped from winning positions. Of course, another few to add on after Saturday, which actually is currently the worst in the Championship so far this season. 13 points dropped from winning positions after only, 12 games or maybe just a few more. That's quite a bit of a cause for concern to have already almost technically dropped a point per game from a winning position. That is rather, that's something maybe you can highlight and really look at with maybe some concern. But ultimately, what it could just be in terms of Saturday, of course, down to we have a very long injury list and the squad at the moment is thin. There's not much rotation you can even do to try and change up the side. But already 13 points dropped from winning positions. Of course, it is still very early on into the season. And of course, that number may not change drastically come the end of the season in May. But that's already just, it seems to a little bit of a recurring theme that Norwich, as of late, just from winning positions, always seem to just drop a few points, especially away from home, because that's ultimately what we've been used to, of course, under Wagner of last season. And we haven't seen it too much from Torup this time around. But it's concerning, really, isn't it? What do you all sort of make of that? 13 points dropped from being in the lead, that could be the difference between a playoff place and missing out come the end of the season, for all we know.
I think part of it comes down to us being a bit passive on the ball. No, sorry, out of the possession. Sorry, I think at times we can retreat a bit too deep, and I think that kind of gives opposition a bit of confidence to really try and have a go at us. Maybe also it's down to as well they identify that Callum Doyle and Callum Fisher, they have quite unique roles in the terms that they've got a transition between defence and midfield quite a lot. So I think teams try and exploit us on the counter a bit as well. But even I think it's also down to, I think a great example was actually against Derby. We felt so comfortable in the game. We were dictating possession, and then all of a sudden they bring on 3 strikers. The crowd goes absolutely crazy after they get like a slide tackle win or something like that. And then Norwich just followed. It just feels like when teams go all out attack and just go heavy metal and just pump balls into the box, Norwich do get a bit vulnerable. And it's quite weird that actually when you've got a 3 defenders in the shape of Cordoba, Hanley and Doyle. Cordoba, Hanley, Doyle, Duffy and Hanley, who are very early, and you expect them to be to win their duels really. And it just feels like at times they just aren't winning those duels in the critical moments. But it just feels like as well, when Norwich are on the ball, we can maybe concede possession a bit too cheaply and just get turned over quite quickly due to opposition wingers having really good levels of pace and speed. So, yeah, I just think at times we do get a bit too passive at times. But I think the Borough game was a great example, actually. We go 1-0 up after a really good goal by Borja Sainz, and then I think we give them a bit too much respect. I think Hackney and Morris are very, very good midfielders of Borough in terms of dictating the tempo of games. And I think when they get ahead of the game and start pinging passes around and linking nicely with their attacking midfielders, and I think Norwich just don't seem to react to those really important moments very well. And obviously, yeah, as I mentioned there, a direct winger seems to cause problems as well. I think obviously Ollie Tanner towards the back end of the second half, I felt, and even Callum O'Dowda, as wing back as well for Cardiff in recent games, and obviously Ben Doak last week. I think there's quite a lot of small reasons which is kind of contributing to our downfall, and why I've been a bit too passive and a bit too negative when we got a lead, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting that you highlight that that response to taking the lead, Will, because that was for me one of the most frustrating parts of the Cardiff game from a Norwich perspective, was that we all knew that there was this problem with how they reacted to goals being scored in games. And actually, I remember being sat there watching it after they scored the opener, and they got sort of 10, 15 minutes clear of that goal. And you actually thought, okay, there's some improvement. They've managed to react a little bit better than they have previously. And you thought at that point they were almost clear of that problem, and that as soon as they had gone 15 minutes after scoring a goal without conceding, that it wasn't going to happen for the rest of the afternoon. But I think Torup spoke afterwards about the fact that he felt the team needed to go and score 2 goals because they actually knew they were going to suffer late on, because they had, the likes of Hanley and Forson in there, and Sorensen was having to come off because they've got so many players in that squad who are now all of a sudden quite important, having barely played a minute over the last few weeks. And I think that got to them a little bit. So I suppose you could say that it's a positive that they managed to score that goal and not react too poorly to that, and they navigated the period after that a little bit better. But having solved that, I think they'll be really frustrated that they then didn't bring the result home, because it felt for a few minutes like one of the major problems of the season had been dealt with.
Yeah, and what you were saying about sort of conceding points from winning positions, I think ever since we've probably had this sort of setback 4 of Cordoba, Duffy, and Doyle and Fisher, I think we've been a lot better. You look at the whole game, no slip up there whatsoever, and obviously Preston and Middlesbrough, 2 games where arguably for even like 45 minutes in both of those games where we weren't at the races, and we did find ourselves behind, and we went on to draw both of those games from losing positions rather than winning positions. So I think personally you can flip it in terms of a positive, in terms of Norwich City's recent results. But I do agree with Will. I think if we come up against these sort of tricky players, sort of going back to Ben Doak for Middlesbrough, Norwich don't really know what to do. We don't know whether to sort of press them straight away and then create gaps in behind us, or whether just to stand off, show them too much respect, and then they can just pick them off. We saw exactly the same with Willie Nonto when Leeds came to Carrow Road. So I think in terms of whenever Norwich face a player like that, that indecisiveness can almost be Norwich's Achilles heel in those bigger ties, so to speak. But yeah, I think stats like that you can sort of spin either way, because recently we've sort of been staring down the barrel of defeat and not lost the games. It was only really that Cardiff game that you could argue was an anomaly. But what I will say about the Cardiff game as well, at the minute, it sort of feels like a game that Norwich City played and lost in terms of the actual stakes of the games and what the game means. That game is one of those that will be summed up based on how our other 2 games this week go. If we can get even 4 points against Bristol City and against Sheffield Wednesday, you're looking at that Cardiff game with frustration that we didn't get the line, but that's about it. It's like, okay, this isn't costly because we've picked up the points. Whereas if we get either 1 point from those games or no points and lose them both, then that Cardiff game becomes a real kick in the teeth. And you go, okay, well, we needed to win that game. So it's definitely one of those games that sort of the impact of won't be felt until this week is actually over and the international break is here.
Yeah, no. And on that international break note, I'm very annoying. Very annoying. We've got another one. It's not fair in my eyes. But before that, yeah, two games which sort of already alluded to. They could be difficult, as you said there, Henry. I agree with that. I would be very happy to come out of them with 4 points from 6, maybe even 6 from 6. Who knows? But as long as we just come out of them unscathed in an injury sense, because the last thing this team needs is even more injuries, and maybe even more so just to keep, just it's annoying of how many draws we've had. Of course, 3 draws in the last 4 matches, and they were all in a row. Just, it would be nice to get another win under our belts and just sort of maybe try and articulate another bit of a push towards the top end of the table. But after all of the sensible talk, it's time for the nonsense. The podcasts are back. The quickfire hot takes are back. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with this, Sam maybe himself, of course, I'm unsure as to how many podcasts of ours you've seen, but every week, Jack, even though he's not here, he writes them down for me, he pings them over, and we've got some quick fire questions which require a quick fire answer, whether it be short and snappy, or maybe you can elaborate on it. Jack's not here, so who knows? He may have not reached this far in the video while he's watching it, and his American or Mexican Wi-Fi cuts out, so maybe we can be a little bit longer with it. But he sends 5, but I've only got 4 for this week. But one of them, he's not really specified if it's Norwich or football in general, so I'll go with 2 in 1 for it, and I'll ask that one first. I'll even answer it myself. So we'll go round in a circle. We'll go Henry first, Will second. We'll go with Sam last. So we'll go with this first one here. So I'll do 2 in 1 for this. What is the most unjust red card? So I'd love a Norwich answer and an actual footballing answer as well from all of you, please.
In terms of Norwich, I can't really remember off the top of my head, to be honest with you. Don't really have an answer to spring to mind. I guess in terms of the most unjust red card in terms of a football perspective, it's got to be that Arsenal-Chelsea game where the ref got the wrong person. I think he sent off, I think Oxlade-Chamberlain handballed it on the line, didn't he? And he sent off Kieran Gibbs. So, that has to be the most unjust red card in football. But for Norwich, can't really have one, I'm afraid. Sorry, my mind has just gone blank.
It's not good enough. No, we'll move on. We'll go on, Will.
I think you can't top Henry's one there with... Sorry, mate, sorry. I don't think you can top Henry's one there with the Kieran Gibbs shout, because physically, you got the wrong person, so how can you top that? But for Norwich, I've got 2. I think the junior list one against Bournemouth in lockdown, and the Howson one last season, I think. No, was it Sainz that got a red card for that game?
Yes.
With that Howson encounter? I've got what player it was in particular, but definitely that incident, yes. Yeah, so I think those 2. I think, but I might have to go for the Howson incident, I think.
I've got a bit of a retro shout from a Norwich perspective. I'm quite glad I've gone last, because I did really need to rack my brains. And if I was in Henry's position, I probably would have been the same, and none would have sprung to mind. But having thought about it for a little while, I remember there was a red card that Grant Holt got against Reading must have been 2010 actually. I think it was the game before Ipswich. So if the suspension had stayed, then he would have missed that game when he obviously scored the hat trick and Norwich won 4-1. But it was a tackle against Reading, which actually wasn't really too bad a tackle at all. Got sent off, looked like he was going to miss the derby, and then it got overturned, which tells you it was the wrong decision. So from a Norwich perspective, I'll say that. On a more general one, I'll stick with Arsenal actually, and this might be a bit controversial because it's a more recent one, but that Declan Rice one, I remember hearing about it on the radio. It was against Brighton, wasn't it? Yeah, and I remember hearing about it on the radio, thinking, "Oh, I'm intrigued to see this." When I got home, I saw it and I thought, "Wow, somebody's rolled their foot over the ball and ended up getting a red card." And I'd have to study the letter of the law a little bit more to decide whether the referee was correct. But there shouldn't be a rule where somebody literally rolls their foot over the ball and ends up, I know it was via a second yellow card, but ends up being sent off. And I'm not sure that'll be a very popular opinion among non-Arsenal fans, but I just remember watching that and thinking, wow, people are getting sent off for that these days. Unbelievable.
I think my favourite part of that red card, I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but it had to be Richard Keys' reaction to it. He put a quote tweet out saying, yes, it was a red card and Declan Rice should have been sent off. But if you actually look, the tweet he was quote tweeting was a Hulk Hogan WWE compilation. It had nothing to do with Declan Rice whatsoever. It was brilliant, and he didn't even acknowledge it. Like, he didn't delete the tweet, and or he didn't comment underneath. But yeah, it was just brilliant how completely nonsensical it was from Richard Keys.
Well, he's got a history of being a bit nonsensical, Richard Keys. But anyhow, moving on, I'll give you my answer here. In a Norwich sense, I'll go with Marquinhos. When we had him on loan, he got sent off against Huddersfield, and I'm pretty sure that got overturned. So again, that gives you a clear indication as to the fact it never should have been a red card. In a footballing general one, I can't remember the name of the player for the life of me, but it was Turkey against Brazil in the World Cup, and it's when a Turkey player kicked the ball at, I think it was Rivaldo, and he went down holding his face as if he'd been shot, and the ball hit him in the shin. And it wasn't really that meticulous from the Turkish player, but he got second yellow and he got sent off for it. And it was just through pure play acting from Rivaldo that the Turkish player was sent off. So I'll go with those two for my answer. But anyway, on to the next one. Which Norwich City player do you believe was in the wrong sport? And if you've got an answer, which sport would you go with?
I'd go Stephen Naismith and darts. He just looks like a darts player, doesn't he? You can imagine him going for ball like while sinking a pint, couldn't you?
Blimmin' hell, Jack has got some real good originality to his questions, hasn't he? I'm trying to think of a Norwich City player who was notorious for diving, because I'm trying to make that link there, and one isn't coming to mind so far. So I always thought Nathan Redmond was a bit of a diver. I don't know what it was. I always thought he had that bit of cheekiness in him to try and win a penalty from absolutely from no promising situation. Can I pass and just go for any Norwich City player that just kept diving? Because I can't think of one. Yeah, you know what?
Yeah, we'll allow you on that front. We'll allow you the obvious link that this week. Yeah, we'll let you off for that one.
Freddie, I'll donate my answer to Will, because obviously both you and Will know that I think that Andrew Sermon's got a bit of tennis vibes about him. So
the Novak Djokovic lookalike, as a young Henry put it. Yeah, you know what? Fair enough. Yeah, no, we'll get on. Yeah, that's fine. Will can have your original answer, and we'll bring back the Novak Djokovic lookalike Andrew Sermon to be playing at centre court at Wimbledon in the summer.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go Marco Stiepermann, because as good as he was for Norwich and he did unbelievable things, I still to this day don't understand how he functions as a footballer. He looks the least like a footballer out of anyone. I mean, he pulled it off, but his technique was so interesting. And I was trying to think, what sport should he be playing? And hockey came to mind. I don't know why, but he's just got that kind of limmy like thing going on, and I don't know. I feel like he could be successful in a sport like that. Although he did do great things for Norwich, so I'm not degrading his contribution. But at no point did he ever look like a footballer, to be honest.
See, Stiepermann to me has got pole vault vibes. You can just you can just imagine him sort of just moving his body because he's so lanky.
No, he was. Yeah, the man who said he was put on the planet, that he was born to score goals, and he did score goals for Norwich. I'll give him that. But no, it's a great answer, because no, he was just, as Henry said there, he's built like a beanpole. He was completely, just never thought he'd be a footballer. For me, I will go with Gary Hooper, and I'm convinced he would have been a brilliant sumo wrestler. I think he would have been excellent. He had the build for it. Did Gary Hooper? I think he's pretty sure he played for Kettering Town last night against Northampton in the FA Cup. So he's still going at 36 years old, I want to say. So no, fair play to Gary, but I reckon he'd be a half decent sumo wrestler if that was a thing in this country. But next one, we'll go with who is the saltiest opposition manager. And I think, considering Sam sits in press conferences with them all on a weekly basis, I'm expecting a good answer from him. But hey, I'll let Henry and Will, of course, go before. But who do you reckon the saltiest opposition manager is?
Well, I think for his antics last season, it has to be Liam Rossignol. I think we outplayed Hull, especially away, but even at home when we got that last minute winner on the opening day of last season, he was just so salty in both games. So yeah, he's definitely my shout.
All I'm going to say is Busgate, Chris Wilder.
Oh, why? No, that's it. Judging by Sam's reaction, I think he was.
Yeah, sorry, my
Wilder.
mic was off, but I did actually say he's taken my answer there. I was lining up Wilder. I thought this is the easiest one ever, but nah, fair play. He was always bound to be one of the first two. Yeah. Rossignol was another one I was considering. I remembered the fallout a little bit about his response to that whole game last season. Or maybe both of them, to be fair. But and I think there's a bit of added Derby flavour to this. But Kieran McKenna was clearly not even for the loss, which I actually thought he took fairly well. But that 2-2 draw at Portman Road, where it really felt that was probably the first time since I started watching Norwich that I thought Ipswich are definitely going to beat him here. And it was weird because, to be honest, a 2-2 draw against Norwich, who had some decent players, wasn't the end of the world. But I think you could tell a little bit from McKenna's tone that he was really, really desperate to win that one. And when you don't win a derby, the classic line is, it's just another game sort of thing. And obviously they went on to achieve great things. So I'm sure they're not thinking about it too much these days. But yeah, on that afternoon, he definitely was not a happy boy with a draw, even if he maybe didn't want to convey it too much.
No. Again, a very fair point. And usually, I've just remembered Jack's old rule of if you mention those boys in blue, you get a yellow card. So unfortunately, I think pretty sure Sam's on a second bookable offence, but I'm going to join him in the booking because I'm going to go with Paul Lambert. When a manager gets sent off against opposition for being riled up, I think it's safe to say that the emotions were a little bit high. Of course, added flavour being a derby and a former Norwich City manager. I think that I'll go with Paul Lambert, and I'll gladly take a yellow card for that one. If Jack was here, but he's not, so we'll rescind any bookings for today. He may not be happy seeing that, but he's not here, so we'll move on to the last question, and this is quite an interesting one. Actually, this is probably the most sensible one that he's come up with, Jack, especially in recent weeks. So, of course, completely hypothetical. Unai Emery, he of course, maybe he'll loan out Emiliano Buendia, former Norwich player. For those who don't know, great player for Norwich. Went on to Aston Villa for a club record sale, but Unai Emery, he's not thinking alone. He comes up to Johannes Hoftorp. He says, Johannes, my friend, I've got a proposition for you. You give me Borja Sainz. I give you Emiliano Buendia. Now, a swap deal would, if you were in Johannes Hoftorp's shoes, are you saying yes or are you saying no to that proposition?
I'm saying no because we're not playing FIFA. This is real life. On FIFA, like I know my brother especially has a tendency of just going on career mode and just re-signing like loads of Norwich players like Buendia. But for me, I think Sainz, what he's doing at the minute is special, and we need to develop that. And people do have a weird fascination about getting back former Norwich players, but for me, it isn't the same if they do come back. So no, I would not take that.
Bold, very bold.
I'm quite a bland guy, so I'm quite a bland guy. So, and my motto is in life: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Borja Sainz is doing so good right now. So I'm going to stick with Borja just because Emi isn't playing right now, and he might dip up performance levels, but he's still the GOAT. So, but I'm going to go Sainz.
I kind of agree with Henry's logic in quite a big way. I think if you actually kind of analyze it, probably you two are right. But for the emotion of it, I'm going to say swap because, to be honest, there are a few players in Norwich City's history that I wouldn't have swapped for Emi Buendia. Not only in terms of effectiveness, because I think it's hard to say that anyone really could challenge Borja Sainz for the sorts of goals that he's scoring at the moment. But I would just love to watch him play football more regularly, to be honest. Even at Villa, even if I'm, turning on their Premier League games, I can't watch him. So if I can swap him and have him at Norwich and just watch that man play football, then I'm happy to do that. Although I actually think probably, unfortunately, you two are right from a purely strategic and analytical perspective.
Yeah, no, they are right, but forget that. Forget logic. It's nostalgia with Emi Buendia, as you've just said there, Sam. I'm saying yes to that in a heartbeat. I would gladly let Borja Sainz go the other way. Of course, he is phenomenal so far this season. 11 goals in the Championship, 12 in all competitions, and of course that is absolutely outrageous. That is truly incredible for a player who isn't a natural striker. But I would, in a heartbeat, bring Emi Buendia back to this football club from nostalgia, as you already alluded to as well. There will never, in my eyes, I think it will take a serious feat for anyone to match how good he was at this football club. Of course, Sainz has done very, very well this season, but Buendia was complete. He was perfect, and of course I think maybe a few people shed a tear when he left, but no, I would gladly bring back Emi Buendia to play in yellow and green, and I'd let Borja Sainz go and play for Villa or sit on the bench at Villa, do whatever he wants. I'm more than happy to take up that proposition. But anyhow, there's your lot for the week, albeit we did miss last week, but we're back with the podcast, and we hope you've all enjoyed it this time around, whether you've been watching on YouTube or you've been listening on Spotify. And a very big thank you to our guest for the week, Samuel Seaman. It's been lovely to have you with us, Sam, and of course one of the Pinken's main boys. He's even, I believe he said to me earlier, he was doing the Pinken podcast as well, so he's had a long day of recording. But I'll let my personal viewpoints of which podcast is the better one stay quiet for now, because I don't want to get in any controversy and ruffle up feathers with anyone. So I'm
not here for podcast beef, I assure you. But no, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
No, Evan, and thank you as well. And a big thank you as well to Henry and Will. Of course, the regulars, rather, with myself, Freddie Humphry-Wakefield, but it's been lovely to have them back with me once again. And we hope you've all enjoyed it here, either on YouTube or on Spotify. It's goodbye for now, and we'll see you again very soon for the next one of ours.